Well, Felix, thanks for being a part of my project. You asked me a question right before we began. I thought maybe it'd be good if I just answered it. What was my goal with this project?
Yeah.
Basically, I'm interviewing a person a day till the end of 2024 to put together a collection of views and perspectives before we kind of cross over into like this new space age. That's my
Oh,
thought.
that's awesome. That's awesome. So you're just gonna like put it together into like a giant like compilation at the end and use it and post it once we eventually get on the moon in 2024. Is that what we're going?
Well, actually, I post them unedited on countdowntothemoon.org. So I kind of
Oh,
have
nice.
one for each day. And at some point, I plan to, maybe have like some type of database front end so you can like maybe find views earlier in the project, later in the project, for, against, that type of thing.
That's a really, really cool idea. That sounds like that's going to be amazing, especially in a few years from now, once or even once we're on the moon or even Mars. It's going to be cool to be able to look back to see what people, including myself, thought during the process and when we were at this point after it's all happened. So that's a good idea.
I know back whenever the Ansari X Prize was won in 2004, people thought
Oh yeah.
Virgin Galactic would have flown by like 2006, and it took them
Exactly.
15 years longer.
It was like everyone was like, it was gonna be Virgin Galactic, and there's people thought that it was gonna be this company and that company, and first of all, nobody really thought SpaceX was gonna be anywhere back in 2006, and then so yeah, things have come a long way.
Yeah, I know. Boeing was like, just give us all the money, and now SpaceX has launched two, what, three? Has it been two or three sets of astronauts?
Three, demo one, crew one, and then two.
Okay,
Yep,
and now they're getting ready to launch four people for Inspiration
Inspiration four.
4.
That one's good. I'm going down to the Cape to see Inspiration four. That's going to be awesome to see. First commercial crew to or first fully commercial crew to orbit. So
I wonder how big that glass thing is. It looks like just enough to put a head through that they're planning to
it's
put
a
on
little
the.
bit big. It's a little bit bigger than that. I know some people who work at SpaceX, so I occasionally get a few inside previews of stuff. But yeah, it's gonna there's gonna be some awesome pictures come out of that because like of maybe two, from what I can tell, I don't have any dimensions or anything, but from what I can tell, maybe two people will be able to like get their heads up in there at one time. And I'm sure people are gonna take some really cool pictures of the Earth on Inspiration 4.
So tell me a little bit about yourself, Felix. Oh,
So
yeah.
I am a I was originally born in Australia. I moved here when I was 4. I'm in central Georgia, so not too far from the Cape, which is quite convenient, being a space fan. So I'm a space nerd and Tesla geek, as well as I just kind of like all technology type stuff. So I've been following SpaceX since, well, I've been following space stuff since the end of the space shuttle era and the beginning of the commercial crew program. And when I saw the Falcon 9 landing itself, that was when I was interested in space, but like in the interested that all kids are when they're like 9 or 10, whatever. But when I saw the Falcon 9 landing itself, that was like the coolest thing ever. And I was like super amazed by that. And I then started really following SpaceX with the Falcon 9 landings and catching the fairings. And I thought that was super cool. And then Starship came around, and Starship is like a level above Falcon 9. So I've been following Starship like crazy. I have done a lot of volunteer work within the space community for different like content creators. I was and am still, to a small extent, I work for Lab Padre, commentate on the live streams for him. And I'm also a volunteer with RGV Aerial Photography, who takes the photos down in Starbase of once a week, the flyovers. So I help with photo editing and managing socials and merch and graphic design, that kind of stuff for him. So I do what I can to contribute to the space community. Sadly, I don't live close enough to a launch site where I can actively contribute in the form of like photography, videography, that type of stuff. I would love to if I could, but unfortunately, I'm just not close enough where I can reliably post content for people to watch. So I just help other people.
Well, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, what about it? He's also Felix, isn't he?
Yes,
He's
he
in
is. He's also Felix.
he's
Yeah,
in Germany, and
yes,
he can't even drive down to the Cape, and he's still able
yes.
to put together what he puts together.
I know. So yeah, I've actually spoken to Felix a few times. Actually, I've interviewed him on stream with Lab Padre once, and talked to him a couple of times. Yeah, he's a really nice guy. So
Yeah, I live in Houston, so driving down to Starbase is about a 7-hour drive for me.
oh,
Went
that's
down
nice.
I went down there in March for spring break to see the SN11, I think.
Oh yeah,
The one that launched in the fog. So I mean, the
yeah.
ironic
That was
thing is,
11. That was 11. That was kind of sad. They did that in the fog. Of course, they did it in the fog. Yeah, that would have been pretty dramatic to see that. If it hadn't been in the fog, it would have been cool to see. But oh well. What SN15 made up for it.
absolutely. But I mean, it would have been so ironic to have. I was like thinking, oh, I'll work from Padre Island for a week and I'll see the flight. But even if I had waited and the flight had happened, I wouldn't have been able to see anything.
You wouldn't have been able to see anything. I know it would have been apparently, like I said, I have some people I know at SpaceX, but apparently they had the FAA people there because the FAA wanted to monitor the flight. So it was a lot of work to get the FAA there for that flight. And if they canceled that date, it would take weeks for them to get another FAA inspector down there for the next launch. So even though they didn't want to launch in the fog, they kind of had to launch in the fog. Otherwise, it would push it off by weeks. And Elon is super, super rush about getting everything done as soon as possible. So they just went ahead and launched it in the fog.
Well, I mean, the big thing now is the orbital test flight, and
Yeah.
it seems like the FAA is also another hurdle that needs to be jumped over.
Yeah, the FAA's, for at least from what I can see, like I said, working with content creators and whatever, I speak to some people, and it seems like the FAA is a little bit upset because SpaceX may have slighted them a few times in terms of like SN8, they didn't really have the correct permits, and then SN9 they flew higher than they were supposed to. So a couple of times, actually several times, SpaceX has done stuff without permission that they should have gotten from the FAA. So now the FAA doesn't it's not that they don't like them, but the FAA is a little bit more strict on them than they otherwise would have been. So right now the big hurdle is getting the orbital launch pad built. They're waiting on permits for the FAA they need some permits in order to finish it, and currently the FAA isn't giving those. So rumor has it that if they don't get the permits, the FAA will make them tear down the launch pad. I seriously doubt that will happen, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, it's kind of like here in Texas we have homeowners associations, and
Yeah.
you got to get approval for everything that you do on the outside of your house, and if you
Yeah, you
don't,
have to get approval for everything. And right now, SpaceX has permission for testing facilities there. So right now they claim the launch tower is for testing purposes, not launches. Because if it's a launch pad, it's a different permit. So they say, oh, this is a test stand. But the problem is, once they start adding GSE lines, like fueling lines to the tower, then by definition, it switches to a launch pad, which is where they will no longer have the permit. And the FAA is working on changing they're working on getting the permits for a launch pad, but being government, as any government thing is, it's slower than it should be. And it takes longer than Elon would like it to. So Elon is kind of like, I want to just go ahead and do it anyway. So we'll see how that goes.
So today is the 52nd anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing,
Yes, it
and
is.
it's also about 50 years since anybody's been to the moon. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I think there's more people. I think there's way fewer people alive before that, that was alive now before that event than
Yeah,
afterwards. Like,
that is
I was
true.
I was wondering how you feel about that. I mean,
I mean, it's kind of both sad and a little bit frustrating that they could have been much further than they are now, but due to a variety of things, one of them being politics, as well as just change of interests, and a bunch of stuff happened in NASA back in the 70s and 80s and whatever, that basically changed NASA from being this, and as well as at the fall of the Soviet Union and no longer having the competitive race with the Soviet Union. But the NASA used to be this like super, let's go pushing to get explore, to go to the next place, go to orbit, then the moon, whatever. And then back when I was younger, growing up, when I was watching like NASA made videos, and they were showing renders of like SSTOs and space planes and whatever they were going to have flying by 2012 and 2015. And they're like, oh, look at this single stage to the moon that we'll have flying by 2020. And none of that just really happened. And it was kind of but the budget with the US government kind of got sent other places, and it was like nobody really cared for a while. And seeing the commercial crew program come back kind of brought life back to NASA. And if NASA had continued on exploring, then we would have been on Mars years ago now, if they hadn't given up after the moon. I know Saturn V and the technology it had wasn't capable of doing Mars, but I mean, we surely would have had the technology to be actively sending people to Mars by now. And the only thing that's really caused us to be now actively going to Mars is the rise of commercial spaceflight. Without the commercial spaceflight like SpaceX and Blue Origin and ULA, we would still be pretty much moving nowhere. It's these commercial companies that have been actively pushing back to get into space flight. And because SpaceX is like, we're going to Mars, NASA's like, oh, we want in on that party. Let's go, we'll go to Mars with you. So it was kind of like the joke I had about the selection process for the human landing system for the moon. I said that basically the reason NASA chose SpaceX is because if they chose SpaceX would take NASA to the moon. But if they didn't choose SpaceX would go to the moon by themselves and probably do it before NASA would. And that's both kind of funny and unfortunately true, that SpaceX currently, with Elon Musk and even the community around SpaceX, has a really strong drive for space exploration and moving as fast as possible. And just generally the way the government works being slower, you end up with them taking longer. So if NASA, for instance, chose like the Blue Origin, like the Dynetics or the National Team Lander with the SLS, by the time you have funding delays and politics and whatever go around, it's going to get delayed. But SpaceX, because they're independent and not controlled by or funded by the government, they'll just keep on moving regardless of what happens to the budget and whatever. So if NASA chooses a different team, SpaceX is going to keep on moving at the same pace and likely end up on the moon before NASA. And then that's going to be kind of embarrassing for a government with a multi-billion-dollar budget to get beat to the moon by a private company. So I always like to say that that's why they chose SpaceX for the human landing system instead of the other ones.
Now, that's a very fair point. Yeah, I get the feeling that even though all the funding's on hold, we really haven't slowed down at all. Maybe just NASA's not engaged, but Starship's being developed.
Elon's goal is not the moon. Elon is like, okay, let's go to the moon, but he doesn't really care about the moon too much. We've been to the moon, we know what's there, we've done science. There's obviously more to explore, but Elon's eyes are set on Mars. And the moon is a good stepping stone, learn to land, whatever. And also it's a commercial opportunity for SpaceX to take astronauts to the moon. And it's a lot easier to get to the moon than it is to Mars. So SpaceX will go to the moon, but if NASA's not going to go with them, then it wouldn't surprise me if SpaceX would just go straight to Mars, because that's really Elon's goal, is making life multiplanetary. And the moon is not really in the consideration for moving a long-term human colony there. That's what Elon wants to do on Mars. So,
but in terms of building a colony on Mars, I mean, essentially, you're talking about a completely self-contained community that's able to do everything that it needs to here on Earth, produce its own food, produce all its building materials, produce everything that needs to essentially make it run and function, as well as produce its own air and deal with the fact that you have less light from the sun and you have zero infrastructure in place.
There is a extensive amount of hurdles to overcome with putting a permanent colony on Mars, or even putting people on Mars for a long period of time. Um, some of them they're working on. There's obviously hurdles we haven't discovered yet, but Elon says, "Oh, we'll send a fleet of starships first because the Mars only comes around every 20, 22 months roughly. So they'll send a fleet of cargo ships first, and then 2 years later they'll send the humans, so that by the time the humans get there, which is about 36 months after the first starships launched, by the time the humans get here, Mars, the cargo ships will already be there, and through the power of robotics and whatever, they may be able to have some level of infrastructure, whether it's solar for power, some process for processing fuel into making like methane for a return and stuff like that. So Elon is super, super optimistic about everything he says. And sometimes you have to be a little bit careful because he's like, oh, we'll go to the moon by this, we'll go to Mars by this time and whatever. And if Elon got everything the way he would like, yes, maybe we could. But the problem is with regulations and permits and people like the FAA and just different things that have to be done first. You can't just go straight to Mars. So it's a process, and it's going to take some working out. I see Starship flying like humans to orbit 2022, maybe, probably sometime within the late end of 2022, unless there's like a major issue with Starship, at least at the rate they're going right now. And then I see maybe some maybe like the Dear Moon project or something happening at the end of 24 type era. And then Mars is probably going to be maybe 2 to 4 years after that. The first ships are going to start going to Mars, because I mean, it's possible Elon's really throwing everything SpaceX has behind Starship and getting it to work. But there's just a lot of stuff, like you said, that has to be solved before that can happen in order to do it successfully. And one thing that's very important is public image is a huge thing when it comes to space travel. And if you send a crew to Mars or whatever, and you have a mission failure, you lose your crew on your first mission because you rushed it too much, that's going to look really bad for your company. And if you want to sell commercial seats to Mars or even cargo to Mars, you're going to have a much harder time. So you really just have to be careful in terms of, you need to take it cautiously and slowly, but not to the extent of like NASA or some of the more established space companies like Boeing and that kind of group.
Yeah, I was just thinking, you know, why don't we have more completely self-contained communities here on Earth to like essentially help test out, prove out, and maybe find out if you have the right people for a kind of like a self-contained community on Mars.
That is a very good idea, and it has been tried on a very, very small scale before. They had a few tests where they had small groups of people which they put into like Mars habitat style confinement for periods of time to see how it would work, and simulated what it would be like to be on Mars as best as possible. And unfortunately, because now being on Mars, being on the surface of the Earth had some part to do with this, but the humans got pretty quickly, they got tired of being in there and then started quarreling and causing, and then there was trouble, and it didn't, I think they lasted for like about 6 to 8 months, I think, in the confinement. Now they have no difficulty surviving on the ISS for long periods of time, because it's a little bit different when you're on the Earth. You get this, you're like, well, I could just open the door and go out. Whereas when you're on the space station or on Mars, you don't really have that choice. So naturally, you learn to work with it and put up with it because, well, you've got to deal with it. But when you're on Earth, you're like, I just want to get out of this and go back to being normal again. So it doesn't, it works to an extent, but because of the aspect of you being so able to just end the experiment at will, it doesn't give the people who are participating the will to actually try and make it work. They're just doing it like for the experiment. But like when you're on Mars, you have to do that or you're gonna die. You have to survive in this environment, in a habitat. So if it's cramped or you have a problem, you'll sort it out. You won't just like, I give up and throw your hands in the air and just march out of the habitat like happened here on Earth. So I think testing can be done to an extent, but nothing completely simulates what it will be like to actually live on Mars for 24 months.
That's true. Well, today is a very historic day. Not only is the Apollo 11th 52nd anniversary, but Blue Origin flew people beyond the Kármán
Yes.
line for the first time. Um,
Yes.
and we both got up this morning and watched it, completely
Yes.
unbeknownst to each other.
Yep.
What were you thinking about it? How did you react?
Whereas I thought it was really cool to see it's in two ways. More is one to see another commercial company launching a crewed astronaut, a crewed vehicle into space, and two, just to see that it's yet another company that's now working towards opening space access up for everyone. And I know right now for sure, and in the near future, it's going to be a elite club of the people with billions and millions of dollars who can afford to pay loads of money for this type of experience. It'll probably be another few years before normal, not super rich people can afford it, but it's a start, and it means that we're actually getting somewhere to being able to get to actually to open space travel up for everyone. Because like many years ago, when NASA was pretty much doing everything, you had to be super lucky to get selected to be an astronaut, to even be in the astronaut program. You first had to come from the military and like a test pilot, Navy, like super, even a pretty tight club in the military. Then you'd apply for an astronaut, and only like a handful would get picked out of thousands of applications. So prior to this, I call it the commercial space age, the dawn of the commercial space age, the odds of you getting to fly to space or even train to be an astronaut were super low. You had to work crazy hard for it. Where now, at the start, it's only going to be rich people. But I see some point in the future, it being accessible for everybody. And not sure how long away that'll be. It depends on different companies and whether companies keep going forward, like Blue Origin and whatever. But there are other companies that are coming up with rockets, Rocket Lab, Firefly, Aerospace, and all these, especially these smaller companies, Astra and Rocket, ULA, SpaceX. They're all building rockets, which primarily will be used for commercial purposes. Like Starship, yes, they probably will fly NASA, but really the primary goal is commercial, sell satellites to orbit, and eventually they'll be able to do tourism to orbit, and that Starship can hold 100+ people for a short trip. So if you divide the cost of a Starship, because they're fully reusable, it's relatively not that much. So you divide the cost of a reused Starship, which is basically the cost of fuel, across 100 people, that brings the costs down into the thousands of dollars for the seats. And obviously, like first class, whatever, there'd be people who pay more. But for like a simple orbital, like 2-day or even 1-day orbital trip, I see maybe in the next 15 years, prices coming down to where you could fly to space for under $25,000, which is really exciting.
I know Gwen Shotwell and Elon both have talked about using Starship for point-to-point Earth travel. Um,
Yes.
Fly from Houston to New Zealand, or I guess in your case, maybe Georgia or Australia might
Yeah,
be of
exactly.
interest in like 30 minutes. And they've talked a little bit about pricing, saying that from what they see, they could be profitable at the equivalent first class airline ticket. So I guess a first class
Exactly.
airline ticket's what, 10, $15,000 to Australia?
Yeah, like from Atlanta, which is the biggest airport in Georgia. Like from Atlanta to Australia, which is obviously not nonstop flights, but it's usually about $8,000 to $10,000. Which I mean, that would be really good because it would mean that people could travel across the world in 30 to 45 minutes, which would be awesome. You could go have a day trip to Australia and come back, provided you have the money for it. Um, but the other thing is currently right now, there's a big ceremony thing of, the astronaut wings that you get when you go above the Kármán line. Like they were doing today and with Virgin Galactics, the astronaut wings. Um, that's going to have to stop eventually because especially with point to point transport, if every single point to point rocket goes out of the Kármán line, which it will if it's going to go any significant distance, it's going to very, very quickly, if you say like 100, 150 people per trip, what was Elon saying, like 10 trips a day or something like that? 10 trips a day, the number of people who you're going to give these awards to is going to be like so high that number one, the award will be devalued. Nobody will care about it anymore because everyone will have one. You can buy them on eBay for $10 or something, but it's too expensive for companies to like, oh, here's your brass or gold or whatever astronaut wings. Someone, a friend of mine, says it'll be like the United giving out the little like Boeing 747 plastic airplane. They says the astronaut wings will no longer be made out of metal. They'll just be these little plastic things, which they hand around a little bucket of these things to all the people who want them when you get off the flight. But it will no longer be an exclusive club, which is a good thing because I would like to go to space one day. So, and I don't see myself ever having the amount of money required to go right now. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine if every airline flight you're on, you had a mission patch that was
I
custom
know.
designed by the people who were on
If you
that
had a
flight?
mission patch and everything, yeah, it's and then ask the term astronaut. Does astronaut, because right now you become an astronaut once you've flown to space one time. You are an astronaut, or really yeah, I believe it's once you've flown to space one time, you're an astronaut. So for all of the people who cross the Kármán line, they will now be astronauts, which means there'll be more astronauts than bankers on Earth, and then that's also now a problem. So we'll have to move the definition of astronaut to like maybe leaving Earth orbit or something like that. Something so it's a more exclusive thing.
You talked about Mars. Would you see yourself immigrating to Mars?
Immigrating permanently, I'd have to see how stuff went. I would definitely consider going to Mars for a trip, provided I don't think I would go as one of the first. I don't think I would go as one of the first. Now, if Elon walked up to me like, "Hey, you want to go on one of the first rockets to Mars?" I would seriously consider it because that's kind of cool. But I mean, once they had a established not moon, a Mars base or colony and some level of infrastructure up there to where living, because the initial few years of being on Mars is going to be like just like continual work to get stuff up and running, and you're going to be working all day, and stuff isn't going to be convenient or enjoyable at that point. But after maybe 4 to 10 years or something of them building there, you'll be able to actually go, and I mean, everybody that does go will still have to contribute, otherwise your colony will fall apart. But it would definitely be fun to go there once, and the moon as well.
Of course, it'd be a long trip. I think minimum you're looking at 2 years, 6 months
Minimum two
there, and
years unless propulsion improves, which is a possibility. There is some basic research into different types of propulsion which could speed the journey up significantly, like nuclear propulsion, which is really cool, and it's still many years off. But if they ever did get nuclear propulsion working properly, you may be able to cut down the time of the journey significantly.
NASA is working with what General. Atomics and you have Blue Origin and a whole bunch of other people to test that out.
Yes, they are working on that, which not only just for sending humans to Mars, but just sending spacecraft deep into space, unmanned probes. Just you'll be able to go so much farther because nuclear, you can go. There's so much more fuel to be used with nuclear, as well as you can go a lot faster. So would you go to orbit if you were offered a flight on Starship, or would you go to Mars even?
Before doing this whole set of interviews and having to process other people's answers to that question, I would say yes, definitely. But as I've started thinking about it more and hearing kind of their thoughts, and also I was taking flying training. So there's some days whenever I get in the plane and the wind's really bumpy and it's really
Oh,
kind
that's
of
cool.
scary. Um, so I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I did, donate to St. Jude so I could potentially be on the
Same.
Inspiration 4 thing. And I was so disappointed. I was like, something technically went wrong. I didn't get the email, and then I found out.
Would you have gone if you got picked?
I I wanted to. My wife told me I couldn't. So that was
It was the same. It was the same. I donated and I thought I says I'm going, and everybody all of my my parents were like, no, you're definitely not going on no rocket if you get picked. I says, oh, I am. Don't worry about that. It's like yeah, it's like a you don't get that you probably won't get that opportunity again for a while. So
well,
but
hopefully, like you said, in like 5 years, hopefully everybody will be getting that opportunity.
I mean, the Mars and the moon is Mars is more of a, especially the Mars, but the moon as well is a much bigger like decision because it's a much it's it's a much bigger thing to go there, a much longer trip with significantly more risk and whatever involved, and it's actually there's a lot more to the trip, obviously more expense, more everything for going to the moon, and even way worse with Mars. Whereas orbit is going to become such a commonplace thing eventually, that going to orbit, I mean, a pretty simple should be a pretty simple thing that it's still not everybody's going to get to go to orbit, but it will be to the point where it's super reliable and super safe, and it'll be like, oh, you want to go to orbit? Yeah, sure. And it's like that. And right now you'll be like, oh, should I go to space? That's kind of scary, whatever. And then you realize, but eventually the boundary of what we think is like the super risky whatever is going to kind of move out, and soon it'll become commonplace to go to orbit, and you just catch a flight to orbit without really thinking about it too much. It'll just take some time to achieve that.
Yeah, I mean the jungle is a crazy, dangerous place that people are really hesitant to go to. But then we go to zoos all the time with tigers and lions, and people go on
Yeah,
safaris all the time.
yeah,
So
it takes time for people to get accustomed to it, and once people, it's the same thing with like new technology as well. As when something significantly new happens, people are usually afraid of it or nervous at first, but once they see more and more people doing it, then they don't actually once they see more and more people doing it, they're no longer quite so afraid of it.
well, I'm really excited about us going to the moon, and I see space as kind of like the next step that's going to enrich humanity. But not everybody's excited about us going to space. Global climate change, pollution, economic development, social justice, name your issue here on Earth. And those people think that space is kind of a distraction from solving quote unquote real problems. I was wondering, how do you approach that discussion?
So I often see people talking about this, mainly politicians and whatever. Oh, we need to solve the problems here on Earth before we go off somewhere else and whatever. But just going with what Elon's kind of goal is, he basically has said that if we don't go to Mars and have humans sustainably living there, something super nasty could happen on Earth, and then either humanity could get completely wiped out, and yeah, you may be still on Earth sorting out social justice and climate change and whatever, and you may have a meteor which you can do nothing about no matter how hard you try come and wipe everyone out, and you will have nowhere to go because, well, you decide to stay on Earth and solve the little problems. And yeah, these things do need addressing, and politics is politics. And I'm not a very political person. I just mostly I pretty much stay out of politics except for where it kind of relates to space travel. But stuff, Earth does need to be taken care of, but not everybody needs to be looking out for Earth. And Elon's definitely done his fair share of looking out for Earth by making Tesla and electric vehicles, which are far more climate friendly than a normal vehicle. And I mean, there's only so much one person / company can do. I mean, Elon has contributed, and I mean, not everybody should have to contribute. If some people want to contribute to making life multi-planetary, is a backup option. And just as it's commercial real estate, eventually you're going to be mining asteroids for resources, because resources don't last forever here on Earth. So you have to kind of think forward. And even if you save the Earth from climate change, resources like iron and coal and whatever are limited. They can be recycled a certain number of times, but eventually you start running low. And it eventually would become more profitable just to mine it from the moon or the asteroids or wherever, which if you haven't already done your research and built rockets by that point, when you do run out, then you have a problem. So it's like some people who feel that that's their mission to work on Earth and save Earth, that they should do that. But we definitely need people working on the space industry and expanding our horizons out into space. And to be honest, we need even more people than we already have. It's the more companies, the better that get into it. And there are already far too many people. Actually, there's never too many, but there are already plenty of people who are climate activists and social justice activists and political whatever that go around, nonprofits, whatever, sorting out these kind of issues. But there's not real, but in comparison, there's very few people who are actually working on space travel. So the people who say, oh, Elon Musk needs to stop going to space and, I don't know, help the Earth in some way, are just kind of ridiculous, because there are plenty of people doing that, and not every single person needs to do the same thing.
Yeah, and whenever people bring that question up to me, I am often wondering, what are they doing? Why
Yeah,
why aren't they addressing these problems that are so important?
that's the biggest thing, is when somebody comes to you, oh, why are you it's like plastic bags, something, why you use plastic bags or whatever, you're going to kill the planet or whatever. And then you look over and says, why are you driving a giant 6-liter diesel pickup truck around? And it's like, you go around going after people for hurting the Earth or not contributing to the Earth, and then you're not really doing much yourself, which is hypocrisy. And it's like, we don't need that kind of people to be doing that, because not only they're not contributing, but they hinder other people's progress by calling them out and telling them they should not be doing that, when the Earth needs all kinds of people to keep things moving. And it's some people work on space travel, some people work on electric vehicles, some people work on poverty and food and that kind of stuff. It's, you don't, there's different problems that need to be solved, and it takes different kinds of people to solve those problems.
Absolutely. Okay, so I kind of one final question. We actually get people going to Mars, and 100 years from now, there's a high school class on Mars that's been given an assignment, very much like high school classes here in the US are given an assignment about Christopher Columbus and the time in Europe before they came over to the New World. And she has to write a paper about what was humanity like before this new space age. And she's looking at this video, and what hangs in the balance is, can she get an A on that paper? Is there some insight or little tidbit that you could give her?
What was humanity like Okay, I need a second to think about a good answer for this one. What was humanity like before the space age? Oh, that's a tough one. Now, there's several answers I could give, but I have to think. I'm trying to think of the best one. Um, hmm. Yeah, that one's really hard. Um, Humanity was, as a whole, was generally concerned about people in general were more concerned about themselves instead of the future and other people. Um, People were only looking at what they could do for their lifetime and not the lifetime of others, and basically and expanding what we know in terms of science and medicine and whatever, when more could definitely be done if people would stop looking out for themselves so much. I mean, more people need to contribute without only contributing for personal gain.
That's a very good advice. Hopefully that's a problem that gets solved then. Well, I know we talked about a whole bunch of other things. Anything you want to add or talk about that we didn't get to?
Well, there's a lot I could talk there's a lot I could talk about space travel. I used to, like I said, I used to talk on a live stream with La Padre and Space 8, and I would talk for like 7 hours at a time with there's a few other people. And so I really could go on all night talking about space travel. Right now, we just look at the like general picture, but when you start talking about in different types of engines and rockets, and there's just so much out there in the aerospace industry that's so cool, and most people don't really get to see it. They just see the news headlines, oh, such and such goes to space, or Starship explodes after failed test, by these clickbait news. And that's the other point, is the media is, remember what I said about looking out for yourself. The media goes around posting news stories that are only designed to get clicks and have extremely misleading, YouTube as well, misleading titles designed to get clicks. And it's like Starship program failure as Starship explodes after landing or something. But they make up these headlines, like especially after like as in 11 and 10 and whatever, big step backward for SpaceX. After I have whole screenshots in my phone of these silly articles, but they post these articles with a headline that is considerably, I wouldn't say misleading, but it's exaggerates what really happened. So you generally give people who don't really know about the space industry and are just kind of just going about their daily life and see a headline the wrong impression of what's really going on. And there's so much in the aerospace industry you could see and learn just by just it with not too much time. If you start looking into what SpaceX or Blue Origin or ULA is doing, it's super interesting stuff going on, and there's the future there. And most people don't understand that. So people say, oh, it's just space travel, they're just building rockets, whatever, blah blah, and go on. But whenever, and a couple of people who I meet and talk to, I'll be like, have you heard of Starship? Oh yeah, they're building rockets, whatever. But then when you start talking to them and explaining them what's going on, they're like, oh wow, that's really cool, I didn't know that. And then they start looking into it, and then soon you have somebody who's following Starship or whatever every day, watching the live streams and the testing and whatever, following the development like I do. It's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. I've talked to some people, my original plan was just go up to people in Starbucks at the store, say, hey, did you know we're going to the moon in 2024, and have a little conversation, which that's what I did in like starting in 2019 through the March of last year. And I started trying to do that some more, but you talk to people and it's like below their radar, but then they start finding out stuff. They really get interested. So,
Yes, that's very true.
well, Felix, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you online and all the stuff that you do.
Yes, thank you very much. Let's see. by chance, do you have like you're on Twitter, right? And you have a website, I see your website. Do you have also things like Discord or anything? 'Cause I'd love to.
Um, I don't have, I mean, I've been on some Discords and honestly, I haven't figured it out yet. It just, so much is going on and I'm hearing bings from stuff that I'm not sure which channel.
It's very confusing. I'm in charge of RGV's entire Discord server, and we have like six and a half thousand people there. So it gets, sometimes it's like a full-time job running that server with so many people there all talking and discussing. I also learn a lot of stuff from it, so that's cool. But yeah, we should at some point we should definitely I'd love to talk to you again in the future and have a chat if you have some time. So
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Yeah, definitely. And I think I may actually be on RGV's Discord.
oh, cool. Yeah, and if you ever need any help with your project, or you need information or people, or I can get you in. Have contacts with a lot of YouTubers and a lot of people who are really into the space type industry. So if you ever need help with anything in your project, or just general information, or just want to chat, I'm always around. I'm in Eastern time, so pretty similar time zone. I'm usually available in the evening after like 6 o'clock Eastern. So
Well, I need 1,258 more people.
all right, 1,258 more people. Okay, well, I'll see if I can I'll see if I could find some really good people who have been around the SpaceX and other stuff for a long time, and I'll send them your way. I'll get them. I assume your DMs are open on Twitter, right?
Yeah, yes, they are.
Yeah.
And I have a calendar set up. So I try to do the interviews right before my workday starts, 7 o'clock
Oh yeah.
Central. So I have it so people could just sign up for a free day. I can send that to you.
Oh yeah, cool. Yeah, shoot me that on Twitter, and if I find anyone that I can get to come along, I'll get them to contact you on Twitter, and I might see if I can get people like. Have you spoken to Felix from What About It?
I have not. I have not.
Yeah,
I'm actually one of his Patreon supporters too. So
yes, I will. I know him pretty well, and I have some contacts that work really close to him. I'll see if I can get him to come speak to you, as well as like Mauricio for RGV and Lab Padre, and I'll see who I can get. I should be able to send a few people your way, and hopefully you can get some nice interviews out of them.
I really would appreciate that. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Okay,
And
well, go ahead.
one more question. Is the recording going to be available from tonight at some point?
Yes, just as soon as Zoom converts it, I upload it to YouTube and post on countdowntothemoon.org. I should be there
Nice.
within the hour.
Oh, nice. Because I definitely want to share it with some of my space fans from that have been following it for a while. They'd probably love to hear our conversation.
That would be fantastic.
All right.
Well, you have
Thank
a good
you, sir. You have a
evening.
great
Thank you.
day. All right.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.